The shuttle docked with a hiss at the gleaming spaceport of Nexus Prime, the jewel of the Galactic Empire's diplomatic outposts. Sergeant Freya Stone watched through the viewport as rows of white-armored Imperial guards formed perfect lines along the landing pad. Their synchronized movements resembled less a welcoming party and more an occupying force, which she supposed was precisely the point. "Quite the reception committee," she murmured, adjusting the collar of her formal diplomatic uniform. The Earth Alliance insignia glinted under the harsh lights of the spaceport. Her AI assistant chirped from her wrist communicator. "Imperial protocol for Earth representatives has been upgraded since the Proxima Centauri Accord. They're trying to intimidate you." "How thoughtful of them," Freya replied with a half-smile. "But they'll need to try harder than synchronized marching." The shuttle door slid open, and she stepped into the artificially regulated atmosphere of Nexus Prime. The air tasted sterile, processed through 1,000 filters. Unlike the gritty, smoke-tinged oxygen she'd grown up breathing in the underground shelters of Neo-Chicago's war zone. An Imperial officer approached, his uniform so pristine it seemed to mock the concept of actual use. "Sergeant Stone, welcome to Nexus Prime. I am Captain Valen, assigned to escort you to the Imperial Cultural Exchange." Freya extended her hand in the human custom, watching the subtle flinch in the captain's eyes before he reciprocated. "Captain, the Alliance appreciates the Empire's hospitality." They walked through corridors of polished obsidian and chrome, past holographic displays showcasing Imperial conquests, though they preferred the term peacekeeping operations. Massive statues of past emperors loomed at strategic intersections, their stone eyes following visitors with uncanny precision. "First time in Imperial space?" Captain Valen asked, his tone deceptively casual. "First official visit," Freya corrected. She caught the reflection of her own face in a passing panel. Sharp features, cropped auburn hair, and eyes that had seen too much for her 32 years. "Though I've had encounters with Imperial forces before." The captain's stride faltered slightly. "I see. Well, the cultural exchange should provide a more civilized introduction to our ways." "I'm sure will be enlightening," Freya said, noting the security cameras tracking their movements, the hidden weapon scanners built into the doorways, the subtle placement of emergency barriers that could seal off sections in seconds. Typical Imperial architecture, beautiful on the surface, battle-ready underneath. Her actual mission parameters scrolled through her mind. Assess Imperial intentions toward Earth, identify technological vulnerabilities, particularly regarding their psychological warfare division, and report back without causing a diplomatic incident. Simple enough in theory. "Your colleagues will join us later today," Captain Valen said as they approached an imposing set of doors emblazoned with the Imperial crest. "The Empire extends its regrets that their shuttle was delayed by solar flare activity." No solar flares had been reported in this sector for weeks. Her team was being deliberately separated. She'd expected as much. "I'm sure they'll catch up," Freya said calmly. "In the meantime, I'd be delighted to begin the cultural exchange. Earth is particularly interested in your advances in atmosphere technology." A flicker of something, suspicion, perhaps, crossed Captain Valen's face before his professional mask returned. "The Empire is happy to share our non-restricted innovations. This way, please." As the massive doors parted, revealing a grand hall filled with elegantly dressed Imperial officials and sleek display cases of technological wonders, Freya allowed herself a moment of recognition. The air here tasted different, not just filtered but laced with something else. Something designed to make visitors pliant, impressionable. They were already testing her in their subtle way, and they had no idea what they were up against. After all, you couldn't scare someone who had already faced the worst humanity had to offer and came out the other side. "Shall we begin?" she asked, stepping forward into the trap that awaited her. Captain Valen's thin smile never reached his eyes. "Indeed. Let's start with our display on atmospheric harmonization." Freya knew the translation: psychological conditioning through environmental control. The Empire's specialty. This was going to be interesting. The cultural exchange facility sprawled across several levels, each more ostentatious than the last. Freya was guided through displays of imperial achievements, terraforming dead worlds, constructing megastructures, and pacifying hostile populations. The subtext was clear with every exhibition. Resistance against the Empire was futile. "And this is our pride," Captain Valen announced as they entered a cathedral-like chamber dominated by a massive hologram of a nebula. The Harmony Chamber, where we study the psychological resonance of different species. The room buzzed with the activity of scientists in white lab coats, their movements precise and coordinated. Above them, the nebula shifted colors and patterns designed to subtly influence brain wave patterns, a fact not mentioned in Captain Valen's smooth narration. "Fascinating," Freya commented, noting the hidden inlets in the walls, the air circulation system more complex than necessary for simple temperature control. "Earth has similar research, though on a much smaller scale." Captain Valen's smile tightened. "Perhaps you'd like a more immersive demonstration?" And there it was, the invitation she'd been waiting for. Freya nodded, her face a mask of diplomatic interest. "I would be honored." She was led into a smaller chamber adjacent to the main hall. Glass walls offered the illusion of openness while actually providing perfect containment. Several Imperial scientists glanced up as she entered, their expressions a mixture of clinical interest and thinly veiled superiority. "Sergeant Stone, allow me to introduce Dr. Marius Thale, our leading researcher in xenopsychology," Captain Valen said, gesturing to a tall, austere man with silver-streaked hair. Dr. Thale inclined his head slightly. "Sergeant, I understand Earth has recently expanded its off-world colonies. How fascinating that your species has advanced so rapidly despite your limited evolutionary advantages." Freya met his condescension with a pleasant smile. "We're resilient, if nothing else, Doctor." "Indeed. Resilience is such an interesting trait," Dr. Thale replied, activating a control panel. "This chamber allows us to study various environmental impacts on cognitive function. Would you care to experience our latest advancement in atmospheric harmonization?" Translation: they wanted to see how she'd react to their fear gas. "Please," Freya said, stepping into the center of the chamber. "I'm curious to see what the Empire considers harmonious." Dr. Thale's eyes narrowed slightly at her tone, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Excellent. Captain, perhaps you should observe from the monitoring station. These demonstrations can be quite powerful for the uninitiated." Captain Valen retreated to a control booth, while several scientists positioned themselves at monitoring stations around the perimeter. Freya stood alone in the center, noting the vents that had silently opened in the floor and ceiling. "We'll begin with a mild stimulation," Dr. Thale announced. "You may feel a slight change in your perception. This is normal." A pale mist began to seep into the chamber, almost invisible except where it caught the light. Freya recognized the delivery method immediately. Aerosolized psychochemicals, designed to trigger the amygdala's fear response. The Empire's infamous fear gas, though they never called it that in official communications. The mist enveloped her, carrying the faint scent of ozone and something else, something deliberately engineered to trigger primal fear responses. Around her, the scientists leaned forward in anticipation, instruments recording her every physiological response. Freya inhaled deeply and smiled. The scent wasn't just familiar, it was nostalgic. It reminded her of the chemical burn of makeshift weapons in the underground tunnels of Neo-Chicago, of desperate days hiding from gang warfare, a childhood spent scavenging in toxic dumps for salvageable tech. "Interesting choice of fragrance," she commented, her voice steady. "Remind me of home." The scientists exchanged glances. Dr. Thale frowned and adjusted the controls. "Perhaps a stronger concentration is needed for Earth physiology." The mist thickened, taking on a faint bluish tinge. This was no longer a diplomatic show. This was a full combat dose, enough to reduce most sentient beings to quivering, hallucinating wrecks. Freya closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. Age 7. Watching her neighborhood burn during the resource wars. Age 12. learning to shoot while chemical weapons drifted through the streets above their bunker. Age 16, becoming immune to fear because the alternative was paralysis and death. When she opened her eyes, she found Dr. Thale staring at her with undisguised shock. "Smells like home," Freya repeated, louder this time. She stretched casually, then walked toward the edge of the chamber where a small console displayed readings. "Is this measuring my heart rate? It seems to be showing normal parameters." Behind a glass partition, Captain Valen was speaking urgently into a communicator. The scientists were frantically adjusting equipment, recalibrating sensors as if they must be malfunctioning. Dr. Thale's composure cracked. "This is impossible. The chemical should be triggering acute stress responses in your limbic system." Freya shrugged. "Maybe you should try a different brand. This one's a bit mild." As she spoke, she casually reached into her pocket, activating the scanning device disguised as a commemorative pin. It would be gathering data on the exact chemical composition of the gas, information that would be invaluable to Earth's defense systems. "Enough," Dr. Thale snapped, signaling for the vents to close. The mist began to clear through purification systems. "Captain, escort our guest to the refreshment area. I believe we've concluded this portion of the tour." As the chamber door slid open, Freya noticed the subtle shift in how the Imperial staff regarded her. Fear, confusion, and, most dangerously, curiosity. She had just become a puzzle they desperately wanted to solve, and that made her both valuable and vulnerable. "Perhaps," she suggested to the visibly shaken Captain Valen, "we should discuss the Empire's interest in Earth's atmospheric conditions over refreshments. I'm suddenly finding myself quite at home here." The double meaning wasn't lost on him. As they walked away, Freya caught Dr. Thale watching her with intense fascination, the look of a scientist who had just discovered an anomaly that challenged everything he thought he knew. Perfect. Phase 1 of her mission was complete. Become interesting enough that they'd keep her close, giving her access to the information Earth needed. The cost of that access, however, remained to be seen. In the refreshment area, a transparent dome overlooking the capital city's gleaming spires, Freya sipped something that approximated tea while Imperial officials whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances in her direction. Her communicator vibrated subtly against her wrist. A message from her team had finally arrived, using their prearranged code. Cultural exchange delayed. Accommodations adequate. Atmosphere less than welcoming. Translation. They were being held separately under the guise of diplomatic protocol. They were unharmed but under surveillance. The Empire was suspicious. She sent back, sampling local atmosphere. "Reminds me of old times." Proceeding with cultural appreciation, Captain Valen approached with two Imperial dignitaries, their expressions carefully neutral. "Sergeant Stone, may I introduce Diplomat Naren and Security Coordinator Vex? They've expressed great interest in Earth's resilience training programs." "A pleasure," Freya said, rising to greet them. "Earth has always valued adaptability. When you've survived as many near extinctions as humanity has, you develop a certain perspective." "Indeed," Diplomat Naren said smoothly. "We've been impressed by human tenacity, particularly your personal fortitude during today's cultural demonstration." Security Coordinator Vex was less diplomatic. "What counteragent are you using? Our scans detected no protective drugs or neural implants." Freya smiled. "No counteragent, just good old-fashioned human upbringing. You expect us to believe that natural immunity to FG-17 exists?" Vex demanded. "FG-17," Freya repeated, filing away the designation. "Is that what you call it? Creative naming isn't the Empire's strong suit, I see." Diplomat Naren intervened before Vex could respond. "What Security Coordinator Vex means is that your reaction was unexpected. The atmospheric harmonizer affects all known sentient species. Perhaps human neurochemistry is more diverse than your study suggests," Freya offered. "Or perhaps some of us have been exposed to similar compounds before." "Impossible," Vex snapped. "FG-17 is a proprietary Imperial development." Freya took another sip of her tea. "History is full of parallel developments, Coordinator. Necessity drives similar innovations, especially in desperate times. The implication hung in the air that Earth might have its own versions of fear gas, its own psychological weapons. It wasn't true, but the seed of doubt was valuable. I'd be happy to discuss Earth's resilience training in more detail, she continued, though I'm more interested in learning about your planetary pacification protocols. I understand they're quite efficient. The conversation continued, a delicate dance of probing questions and deflected answers. All the while, Freya's commemorative pin continued scanning, collecting data on Imperial communications frequencies, security protocols, and most importantly, any mention of Earth in their classified channels. As they parted ways several hours later, Captain Valen escorted her to her assigned quarters. Your colleagues should arrive by morning. In the meantime, you have full access to the visitor areas of the facility. How generous, Freya replied. I'll look forward to tomorrow's exchange. Perhaps we could focus on atmospheric purification technologies? Earth has particular interest in that area. Captain Valen's expression remained carefully blank. I'll convey your request to the appropriate authorities. After he left, Freya immediately swept her quarters for surveillance devices. She found 17, ranging from primitive audio bugs to advanced neural pattern scanners. She disabled none of them. Doing so would only confirm their suspicions. Instead, she activated a subtle jamming field around her personal effects that would create just enough interference to make their surveillance unreliable. Settling on the edge of the too-perfect bed, she removed her boots and extracted a small communication module hidden in the heel. With practiced movements, she composed a detailed report of her findings for her real handlers back on Earth, focusing on the fear gas specifications and the Empire's obvious intention to use it on a larger scale. Initial assessment: Empire has weaponized fear to unprecedented levels. FG-17 confirmed as primary control method for subject planets. Immune response generated significant interest, potential leverage point. We'll continue investigation into distribution systems and planetary targets. Require information on rumored Earth infiltration points. She sent the encrypted message through a quantum channel that would leave no trace in Imperial networks, then carefully reassembled her boot and prepared for sleep. As she lay in the dark, surrounded by Imperial surveillance, Freya allowed herself a moment to remember the real reason behind her immunity. The war-torn streets of Sector 12, where chemical weapons had been commonplace during the resources conflict, where children learned to breathe through rags soaked in countermeasures, where fear was a luxury no one could afford. Not for the first time, she reflected on the irony that her nightmarish childhood had become her greatest strength. The Empire could never understand that they weren't the first to weaponize fear, merely the most organized about it. Their mistake was assuming that fear worked on everyone. They'd never met someone who had already faced their worst nightmares and survived. Tomorrow, she would begin actively probing their defenses. Tonight, she would rest, breathing easily in air laced with surveillance nanites and subtle psychological influencers, none of which affected her in the slightest. Smells like home, indeed. Morning arrived with a gentle illumination of her quarters and a soft chime from the communication system. Sergeant Stone, your colleagues have arrived. They await you in the Central Exchange. Freya dressed quickly in her formal uniform, checking that her various concealed devices remained undetected. Her sleep had been undisturbed, too undisturbed, in fact. The Empire had likely been monitoring her brain patterns, trying to understand why their atmospheric controls had failed to influence her dreams. The corridor outside her quarters was busier than the previous day, filled with Imperial staff moving with purpose. Something had changed overnight. There was tension in the air, a sense of urgency that hadn't been present before. Captain Valen was waiting by the lift, his posture even more rigid than yesterday. Good morning, Sergeant. I trust you slept well. Like a baby, Freya replied with a smile. Your atmospheric controls are quite soothing. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Indeed. This way, please. They descended several levels, moving deeper into the facility than yesterday's tour had covered. The architectural elegance of the upper levels gave way to more utilitarian designs, still impressive, but clearly focused on function over form. I thought we were meeting in the central exchange, Freya commented casually. Change of venue, Captain Valen replied curtly. Administrative decision. They passed through several security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last. Freya noted the increased presence of armed guards and the subtle scan fields that analyzed everything from her DNA to her neural patterns. Finally, they reached a large circular chamber dominated by a conference table. Around it sat her team, Lieutenant Emil Reeves, Communications Specialist Maya Wong, and Cultural Attaché Rowan Tanner. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but Freya could read the tension in their postures. Also present were Dr. Thale, Security Coordinator Vex, and a new figure, a tall, imposing woman whose uniform bore the insignia of Imperial Intelligence. Sergeant Stone, Captain Valen announced, "May I present Director Lysithea Kell of the Imperial Information Division." Director Kell didn't bother with pleasantries. "Sergeant, we have some concerns about yesterday's cultural exchange." Freya took her seat beside her team, giving them a subtle nod of reassurance. "I wasn't aware there were any issues, Director. I found the experience quite illuminating." "I'm sure you did," Director Kell replied coldly. "Our concern is exactly how you remained unaffected by the atmospheric harmonizer. As I explained to Dr. Thale, perhaps human neurochemistry is more diverse than your studies suggest." Director Kell's eyes narrowed. "We've tested FG-17 on 17 human subjects prior to your visit. All responded as expected." The casual admission of human experimentation hung in the air. Beside Freya, Roan shifted slightly, a sign of controlled anger. "Then perhaps it's something specific to my neurochemistry," Freya suggested. "I'd be happy to provide medical data if it would advance our cultural exchange." "Your medical data has already been collected," Director Kell stated. "While you slept." Freya raised an eyebrow, but showed no other reaction to this violation of diplomatic protocol. "And what did you find?" Dr. Thale leaned forward. "Anomalies. Your amygdala shows signs of significant adaptation consistent with prolonged exposure to similar compounds. Your fear response has been effectively rewired." "Interesting," Freya commented, "though hardly surprising given Earth's history." "What we want to know," Security Coordinator Vex interjected, "is how Earth has obtained chemical compounds similar to FG-17 when they are exclusive Imperial technology." Lieutenant Emil Reeves spoke up for the first time. "With respect, Coordinator, Earth has experienced numerous chemical weapons attacks during our resource wars. Many compounds were developed independently by various factions." "Convenient explanation," Director Kell said dismissively. Freya shrugged. "It's the truth. I grew up in Neo-Chicago's Sector 12 during the worst of the chemical attacks. You develop adaptations or you don't survive. And these adaptations," Dr. Thale said, clearly fascinated despite himself, "they're natural, not engineered. Natural in the sense that they developed without deliberate genetic modification," Freya explained. "Though there's nothing natural about children having to adapt to chemical warfare." A silence fell over the table. Freya could see the Imperial officials recalculating their assessment of Earth and of her. They had clearly expected a deal with diplomats easily manipulated by their fear gas. Instead, they'd encountered someone not only immune but intimately familiar with the concept. Director Kell broke the silence. "We have revised today's cultural exchange program. You will be given a tour of our atmospheric research facilities, where we develop technologies to help planets with hostile environments become habitable." Translation: they would be shown carefully staged versions of the facilities where fear gas was produced in hopes that they might reveal how much Earth knew. "We would be honored," Freya replied. "Earth has great interest in atmospheric modification, given our own environmental challenges." As they were led from the conference room, Maya Wong managed to brush past Freya, their hands touching briefly. Freya felt the small data chip pressed in her palm and smoothly transferred it to a hidden pocket. The message was clear. Maya had found something important during her separate tour yesterday. The atmospheric research facility occupied an entire sublevel of the complex, a maze of laboratories and testing chambers where Imperial scientists worked behind transparent barriers. The tour group was kept at a careful distance from the actual work, guided through observation corridors that offered impressive but ultimately sanitized views. Here we develop specialized atmospheric compounds for various species. Dr. Thale explained as they passed a chamber where pale mist swirled around simulated alien vegetation. Each planetary ecosystem requires a unique approach. Fascinating, Roan commented, playing his role as cultural attaché perfectly. How do you test the effects on sentient beings? Extensive simulations, Dr. Thale replied smoothly. And control volunteer studies. Freya caught Lieutenant Reeves' slight scoff at the word volunteer. As they moved through the facility, Freya's enhanced peripheral vision caught glimpses of what they weren't meant to see. Production scales far beyond what would be needed for terraforming, military designations on sealed containers, and most tellingly, star maps with specific systems highlighted for what could only be deployment. Earth's system was among them. During a demonstration of atmospheric density control, Freya managed to activate her scanner, sweeping it across the laboratory equipment while appearing to merely appreciate the technology. Maya, meanwhile, was engaging Dr. Thale in a detailed discussion of chemical synthesis, keeping his attention diverted. What about delivery systems? Lieutenant Reeves asked, his tone casual. Atmospheric modification at planetary scale must require sophisticated distribution networks. Security Coordinator Vex answered before Dr. Thale could. That information is classified. Imperial environmental assistance is handled entirely by our specialists. Of course, Reeves replied. Earth would never expect access to proprietary technology. We're merely curious about the theoretical approach. Theory can be dangerous, Director Kell said coldly, particularly in the wrong hands. The implication was clear. They suspected Earth of trying to steal their fear gas technology. The irony was almost amusing. Earth didn't want to replicate it. They wanted to defend against it. As they completed the tour, returning to the upper levels for what was described as a cultural reception, Freya found herself walking alongside Director Kell. You're an unusual specimen, Sergeant Stone, the director said quietly. In another life, you might have made an excellent Imperial operative. I'm quite content serving Earth, Director, Freya replied. Though, I appreciate the compliment. Is it a compliment to note that you've developed immunity to fear? Director, quel muset. Some might consider that a loss of essential humanity. Freya met the woman's calculating gaze. Fear isn't what makes us human, Director. It's what we do despite our fears that defines us. Interesting philosophy, Director Kell said. Though I wonder if it's truly fear you've overcome, or merely its chemical simulation. I suppose we'll never know, Freya replied with a slight smile. Unless you have something stronger than FG-17 to test. The director's expression remained impassive, but Freya caught the subtle shift in her posture, a tell that she'd hit upon something significant. The Empire did have a more potent version, as Earth intelligence had suspected. Enjoy the reception, Sergeant, Director Kell said as they reached the Grand Hall. Tomorrow's exchange will be enlightening for all parties. The reception was elaborate, a showcase of imperial wealth and power disguised as diplomatic hospitality, exotic foods from 100 worlds, entertainment that subtly highlighted imperial military might, and everywhere, the faint underlying current of atmospheric enhancements designed to make guests more receptive to imperial messaging. As they mingled with officials from other worlds, most of whom seemed slightly dazed and unnaturally agreeable, Freya and her team executed their carefully choreographed intelligence gathering. Roan charmed information from mid-level bureaucrats, Maya cataloged technologies, and Emil surreptitiously scanned communication frequencies. When they finally returned to their quarters that night, they activated the privacy field Maya had smuggled in, a bubble of protection that would give them a few precious minutes of unsurveilled conversation. They're planning something for tomorrow, Emil said immediately. I overheard security details for what they're calling a special demonstration. Maya nodded. I got access to part of their compound database. They've developed something called FG-20, a refined atmospheric influencer that's targeted specifically for human neurochemistry. They're going to test it on us, Freya concluded. Particularly me, since I proved immune to the standard version. Roan pulled out a small device disguised as a diplomatic credential. I placed tags in all the major ventilation junctions. If they release anything, we'll know exactly what and where. Good, Freya said. What about the Earth targeting? Maya's expression darkened. Confirmed. They've been seeding FG-17 into the atmosphere processors of our outer colonies. Small amounts, building up gradually to prevent detection. The long game, Emil muttered. Get everyone slightly afraid, slightly paranoid, then ramp it up when they're ready to move in as peacekeepers. We need to transmit everything we've found, Freya said. Tonight. The Empire is already suspicious. By tomorrow it might be too late. They worked quickly, compiling their findings into an encrypted data package. Freya added her own assessment. The Empire wasn't just using fear gas for control, they were becoming dependent on it. Their entire strategy for expansion relied on psychological manipulation rather than direct military confrontation, which meant they had no idea how to handle someone who wasn't afraid. Transmission complete, Maya confirmed as their privacy window began to close. Earth Defense Command acknowledges receipt. Now we just need to survive tomorrow's special demonstration, Roan said dryly. Freya smiled grimly. Don't worry. I've been preparing for this my entire life. As the others returned to their quarters, Freya examined the small device Maya had slipped her earlier. It contained detailed schematics of the facility's environmental control systems, including emergency overrides. If things went badly tomorrow, they might have a chance to turn the Empire's own weapons against them. She fell asleep planning contingencies, her dreams untouched by the subtle fear compounds still cycling through her room's ventilation system. Morning brought no subtlety from the Empire. Armed guards escorted them directly to a large amphitheater deep within the facility. The circular space was arranged like a court, with tiered seating filled with high-ranking imperial officials. At the center stood a transparent chamber, clearly designed for demonstrations. Director Kell greeted them with cold formality. Earth representatives, thank you for your participation in today's special cultural exchange. The Empire believes in transparency, so we've invited observers from various allied systems to witness our discussion. Discussion, Emil muttered under his breath. Is that what we're calling it? Freya surveyed the room, noting the strategic positions of guards, the sealed ventilation systems, and most importantly, the eager anticipation on Dr. Thale's face as he stood beside a control panel. Today we will address concerns about Earth's apparent development of counteragents to atmospheric harmonization technology, Director Kell announced to the assembled dignitaries. As this represents a potential violation of non-proliferation treaties, we have arranged a demonstration to confirm our suspicions. The Earth Alliance has violated no treaties, Roan objected formally. We request communication with our government before any demonstration proceeds. Communications are temporarily unavailable due to solar interference. Security Coordinator Vex replied, not bothering to make the lie convincing. The demonstration will proceed. Director Kell gestured to the transparent chamber. Sergeant Stone, as you have shown unique resistance to standard atmospheric harmonizers, we invite you to participate in a more concentrated experience. And if I decline? Freya asked, though she already knew the answer. Then we must assume Earth's guilt and take appropriate precautionary measures, Director Kell replied smoothly. For the safety of all civilized systems. Freya exchanged glances with her team. They had anticipated this. The Empire trying to prove that Earth had developed countermeasures to their fear gas, using that as pretext for more aggressive actions. I accept, Freya said, stepping forward. Though I know for the record that this violates at least 7 provisions of the Interstellar Diplomatic Accord. As guards guided her to the chamber, Emil whispered, Emergency Protocol Theta, if needed. Freya gave a slight nod. Theta meant they would attempt a hostile extraction if things went badly, a desperate measure, but they'd come prepared for desperate scenarios. The chamber door sealed behind her with a pneumatic hiss. Above, the amphitheater's occupants leaned forward in anticipation. Dr. Thale approached the control panel, his fingers dancing across the interface with barely contained excitement. Esteemed colleagues, his voice echoed through the speakers. Today we witness the effects of our new planetary pacification formula, FG20. Specially calibrated for human neurophysiology, it represents the culmination of our xenopsychological research. Freya stood calmly in the center of the chamber, hands relaxed at her sides. She caught Maya's eye through the glass. Her colleague's hand was subtly positioned near her concealed transmitter, ready to activate their contingency plan. Beginning atmospheric introduction, Dr. Thale announced. The vents opened, and a dense, crimson mist began to fill the chamber. Unlike the previous version, this gas had a distinct metallic scent that triggered immediate recognition in Freya's mind. It was molecularly similar to the nerve agents used in the worst days of the resource wars, the ones that had left entire sectors of Neo-Chicago uninhabitable. The ones she had learned to breathe through as a child, when filter masks were too precious to waste on those not fighting. As the concentration increased, Freya felt the gas's effects probing at her consciousness. More sophisticated than FG-17, targeting specific neural pathways with precision. It was trying to bypass her adapted defenses, searching for weaknesses in her psychological armor. Around the amphitheater, the observers watched with clinical interest, expecting to see her collapse in terror or reveal the countermeasure they believed she must be using. Instead, Freya closed her eyes, centered herself, and drew upon the memories that had forged her immunity, not to suppress the fear, but to acknowledge it as an old companion. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at the observation window where Director Kell stood. With deliberate movements, she inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the crimson mist. "Smells like home," she said, her voice clear through the chamber's audio system. "You'll have to do better than this, Director." A murmur ran through the assembled officials. Dr. Thale frantically adjusted controls, increasing the concentration to levels that should have been incapacitating. Freya remained standing, her expression calm. "It's interesting," she said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather, "how you've refined a molecular structure to target the hypothalamus directly. Almost identical to the compounds used in Sector 12 during the third phase of Earth's resource wars." She paced the chamber, analyzing the gas, as if she were the scientist and they the subjects, though you've added a synthetic neuroinhibitor that wasn't present in the Earth versions. Clever, but ultimately ineffective against adaptive immunity. Dr. Thale's face had lost all color. Director Kell's expression had hardened into something dangerous. "This is confirmation," Security Coordinator Vex declared. "Earth has been developing fear gas countermeasures in violation of treaty provisions." "On the contrary," Freya replied, "this is confirmation that the Empire has been studying Earth's internal conflicts to develop weapons against us. The molecular similarities are too precise to be coincidental." She turned to address the gathered officials directly. "Honored representatives, what you're witnessing isn't Earth's violation of treaties, but proof that the Empire has been weaponizing trauma. They've studied our worst moments of civil conflict and engineered tools to recreate that fear." A ripple of unease passed through the audience. Several representatives from neutral systems exchanged concerned glances. "Enough," Director Kell snapped. "Increase to maximum concentration." "Director, the safety protocols," Dr. Thale began. "Override them," she commanded. The mist in the chamber turned deep crimson, becoming almost opaque. The concentration was now well beyond what any living being should be able to withstand. Freya felt her heart rate increase. Her pupils dilate as her body fought the chemical assault. This was beyond what she had experienced, even in the worst days of Sector 12. For the first time, she felt genuine concern. Not fear of the gas itself, but fear that her immunity might have limits after all. But fear had been her teacher for too long to control her now. She drew on decades of conditioning, of breathing toxic air and fighting through the paralysis of terror. She had survived worse with less preparation. "This is your ultimate weapon," Freya called out, her voice steady despite the burning in her lungs. "The culmination of Imperial science." She walked deliberately to the edge of the chamber, placing her palm against the transparent barrier where it faced the largest concentration of diplomatic observers. "Look closely," she told them. "This is what the Empire plans for your worlds. First the fear, then the protection. Ask yourselves, who will protect you from your protectors?" Through the crimson haze, she could see the shock on their faces. An empire built on enforcing fear through chemical means had just revealed its weakness. What happens when someone isn't afraid? Director Kell's voice came through the speakers, ice cold. "This demonstration is concluded. Security, seal the chamber and prepare the subjects for enhanced interrogation." That was the signal. Freya pressed her palm harder against the barrier, activating the microscopic device Maya had given her the night before. It sent a pulse through the facility's environmental systems, triggering the emergency overrides they had identified. Alarms blared. Throughout the amphitheater, secondary vents opened, not releasing fear gas, but deploying the emergency countermeasure the Empire had designed as a failsafe. The crimson mist in Freya's chamber began to dissipate, while a mild sedative mist filled the amphitheater. Chaos erupted as Imperial officials realized what was happening. The Empire's own fear gas neutralizer was being deployed against them, revealing another critical fact to the diplomatic observers. The Empire had been exposing them to low doses of fear gas throughout their visit. As the neutralizer cleared their systems, many diplomats reacted with outrage, suddenly aware of how their judgment had been subtly manipulated. Electronic communications restored. Emil announced loudly, activating his emergency transmitter. Live feed now broadcasting to all diplomatic channels. "This is a violation." Security Coordinator Vex shouted, ordering guards to seize the Earth delegation. Roan stepped forward, his diplomatic credentials displayed prominently. "Any action against accredited representatives during an active broadcast will be viewed as hostile by all 17 signatories of the Interstellar Diplomatic Accord." The chamber door slid open as the facility's automated safety protocols responded to the emergency signals. Freya stepped out, her eyes locked on Director Kell. "The Empire has been exposed," she said calmly. "Fear gas in diplomatic quarters. Illegal experimentation. Planned deployment against Earth colonies. All now documented and transmitted to every major system in the sector." Director Kell's face contorted with rage, but even she recognized the diplomatic catastrophe unfolding. The Empire had built its expansion on the illusion of benevolence, using fear gas to manipulate rather than outright military conquest. That illusion was now shattered. "This means war," she hissed at Freya. "No," Freya replied. "It means accountability. It means your expansion stops. It means the worlds you've subjugated with chemical fear will soon know the truth." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It means you've met someone who knows what real fear is, Director, not your synthetic approximation." Around them, the diplomatic observers were demanding answers. Imperial officials were trying to restore order, and in the confusion, Maya was collecting final data readings from the exposed systems. "Our shuttle is prepped for emergency departure," Emil murmured as the team regrouped. "Alliance forces have been notified of possible hostile action." Freya nodded. "Then let's not overstay our welcome." As they made their way toward the docking bays, escorted by suddenly solicitous Imperial guards eager to avoid further diplomatic incidents, Dr. Thale appeared in their path. "How?" he asked, scientific curiosity overriding political concerns. "How is it possible? The neurochemical reaction should be universal." Freya paused, considering the man who had been so eager to expose her to his psychological weapons. "When you grow up breathing fear, Doctor, you learn that it's just another sensation. Not a master, but a messenger." She studied his face, seeing genuine incomprehension. "Your empire has spent so long using fear as a weapon that you've forgotten what it's really for: survival. My survival required that I make peace with fear long ago." She stepped around him, rejoining her team as they continued toward their shuttle. Behind them, the Imperial diplomatic outpost descended into crisis as representatives from a dozen worlds demanded explanations for the chemical manipulation they had unknowingly experienced. Transmission signals flooded out across the sector, carrying with them data packages meticulously compiled by Earth intelligence. Evidence of the Empire's fear gas program, its deployment strategies, and most crucially, its counteragents. As their shuttle broke atmosphere, Freya watched the gleaming spires of the Imperial complex recede. For all its architectural grandeur, the Empire had built its foundation on something fragile. The assumption that fear would always work, that terror was a universal constant that could be weaponized without consequence. Transmission from Earth Command, Maya announced. They received our complete data package. Defense systems are already being updated with countermeasure protocols. And the Empire? Freya asked. Diplomatic chaos. Roan reported with evident satisfaction. 3 systems have already suspended relations pending investigation. Their whole sector strategy is crumbling. Emil was monitoring Imperial communications. They're scrambling to contain the damage. Military vessels are being recalled to core systems. They're going defensive. Freya nodded, feeling the shuttle accelerate as it cleared the planet's gravity well. The mission had succeeded beyond their expectations. Earth had gained not just intelligence on the Empire's fear weapon, but had exposed it to the entire diplomatic community. Not bad for a diplomatic exchange, she said. So what happens now? Maya asked as stars streaked past the viewport. Freya gazed into the darkness of space, thinking of the red mist and the memories it had stirred. Now the Empire learns what happens when fear fails. They'll either adapt to a galaxy where psychological manipulation isn't enough, or they'll fade into history. And Earth? Emil questioned. Earth remembers what we learned long ago, that our greatest strength comes from our greatest trials. Freya touched the viewport, her reflection overlaid against the stars. After all, what doesn't kill us? Makes us really, really hard to scare. Roan finished with a grin. The shuttle jumped to FTL, leaving behind an empire that had just discovered the fundamental flaw in building power on fear. Eventually, you meet someone who has already faced their worst nightmares. Someone who breathes in your terror weapon and simply says, "Smells like home." 2 weeks later, Freya stood before the Earth Alliance Security Council, delivering her final mission report. The chamber was solemn, the counselors' faces grave as they absorbed the full implications of the Empire's fear gas program. Thanks to your team's actions, we've been able to distribute countermeasure protocols to all Earth colonies and allied systems, the security director stated. Imperial influence has been reduced by an estimated 60% in contested sectors. And the fear gas research? Freya asked. Neutralized as a strategic threat, the military liaison confirmed. With the formula exposed, defenses are being implemented across the galaxy. The Empire's advantage is gone. The diplomatic counselor leaned forward. However, we've received intelligence that the Empire isn't abandoning its psychological warfare division. They're reassessing, adapting. They seem particularly interested in why you, specifically, were immune. Freya wasn't surprised. The Empire had built its expansion on understanding and exploiting fear. Her immunity represented a failure they couldn't accept. They'll be watching you, the security director warned. You've become a symbol, proof that their greatest weapon has weaknesses. Let them watch, Freya replied. Let them learn that humanity's greatest strength isn't technology or military might, but our capacity to endure. We've survived our own worst impulses, our own self-inflicted horrors. What could they possibly create that we haven't already overcome? After the debriefing, Freya found herself on an observation deck overlooking Earth, blue and green and alive, despite centuries of humanity's attempts to destroy it. Sector 12 was visible from here, still bearing the environmental scars of the resource wars, still home to people who refused to surrender. Lieutenant Reeves joined her at the viewport. Command has new intelligence. The Empire is pulling back from 3 key systems, consolidating around their core worlds. The fear has shifted Freya observed. Now they're the ones wondering what's coming. They've also put a name on their most wanted list, Emil added with a sideways glance. The woman who wasn't afraid. Quite the reputation you've built. Freya smiled faintly. Not afraid? That's not quite right. I feel fear, Emil. I just learned long ago not to let it make my decisions for me. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Earth rotate slowly below. Finally, Emil spoke again. They're offering you a promotion. Special Diplomatic Corps. Apparently, having someone immune to fear gas is considered an asset now. And you? Security detail for the new Diplomatic Immunity Division. Someone's out to watch your back when you're inhaling alien toxins and making enemies. Freya laughed, a genuine sound rarely heard during missions. Diplomatic Immunity. Clever name. As they prepared to return to headquarters, Freya took one last look at Earth, at the scarred region that had forged her immunity through suffering and survival. The Empire had tried to weaponize fear without understanding its true nature, not as a controller, but as a teacher. Their mistake had been assuming that fear was a weakness to exploit. They hadn't realized that in the crucible of Earth's harshest environments, fear had been transformed into something else entirely, resolve. And resolve, unlike fear, couldn't be dispelled with a counteragent. Ready for the next mission? Emil asked. Freya nodded, turning from the viewport toward whatever challenges awaited. Always. After all, nothing out there smells worse than home. End.